Hi everyone, welcome to another video of Neovim series. Today I want to talk to you about writing markdown in Neovim. We all do write markdown, whether it's a README file or prose or content in my case. Markdown is an excellent editor for, Neovim is excellent editor for writing markdown. So before we start, as always, if you're new here, thank you for watching. Welcome. I typically create videos about Neovim, Kubernetes, Docker, Cloud Native Space, and all the geeky stuff in between. If you're a subscriber, thank you for supporting the channel and welcome back. So what we will do today, we are going to go through Neovim setup for writing Markdown. We will look at few useful plugins to have. There are not many. We will see how to do typical stuff that you might be familiar with from other editors, like correcting grammar, using thesaurus or autocorrect. We'll also learn how to handle images and display them inline in Neovim Markdown files. And finally, we will see how to apply various settings, key bindings, and all the quality of life improvements. So let's talk about plugins. For Markdown, there are 4 essential plugins. One is Neoformat. It essentially helps you to format all kinds of files, all kinds of code, including Markdown. It's very easy to use and kind of helps you with formatting Markdown as well. Novim Markdown from IXRU is a fork of Vim Markdown plugin with some added functionality. There are not that many Markdown processing plugins. People write them every now and then. You can do a lot with default settings, but I find this plugin has some interesting features that we'll look at. Markdown Preview, very important plugin. I use it all the time. It simply allows you to preview your Markdown file in a default browser. It's also, of course, configurable. There is a way to preview Markdown in Neovim. There's a new plugin that does it. However, it's never going to be exactly like you would see it in browser, and that's typically how you would consume the rendered Markdown, that's why I find this plugin very useful. And a Vim open URL, it's a requirement for the Markdown plugin preview to work. It's an open URL from inside Neovim. There are some nice to have plugins that we'll see in action. Those have something to do with editing and interacting with code fences. So let's talk about how and where to put the configuration for Markdown. I highly recommend taking advantage of the FT plugin folder feature in Neovim. This means that you would place markdown.lua file inside of this folder. So config nvim ft plugin would typically be a path, and that means that the file would contain settings, in our case for Markdown, and would only load for Markdown files. So you can have specific key bindings that only work for Markdown, various settings, and so on. So that's a clean way to bundle together all the settings, all the key bindings and functions, the modules, whatever you have inside of a single folder. So we will see this file later, but that's, I believe, the best way to do it. So let's start by looking at various things. First, we will check folding. So I'll open another pane and we are going to edit the exact file that you see in slides. It's written in Markdown. So this is a corresponding part. And if I hit ZI, you can see that everything is folded. And I can hit, for example, O to unfold it. It's slightly different folding and unfolding than the default mechanism in Neovim. So not all the Z commands work, but it works well enough so that you can see all kinds of folded headers here. And there's different levels of folding. You can switch them on, switch them off, and that's a nicer way of viewing a large Markdown files. So next one is spelling. Spelling is really simple. It relies on an internal Neovim file that contains all the autocorrection and spelling words that you add to it, and it also comes with the English dictionary. So you can see here I can set local here, and this is for English. You can also set for German or other languages. So first, what you want to do is set the spelling, spell or no spell. I have it bound to a key binding, and if I want to activate spelling, I would just set it, and then the whole markdown spelling would be recognized. So how does it work? First, if we want to navigate to a misspelled word, the default binding is close square bracket S. If you want to navigate to the previous one, it's opposite, open square bracket S. If the word is correct, so we want to add it to our dictionary, we would use ZG to add it to a global dictionary. However, if the word is incorrect and we added it by mistake, we can revert it by doing ZW. Finally, to see all the suggestions for correction, you can do Z equals, and then you have numbers to select it from. So let's see how it works. We're gonna go back to our previous file, and for example, let's make a mistake in this file right here. So we're gonna add a letter. You can see it's highlighted. If I do Z equals, it displays a list. This list integrates with the which key plugin. Otherwise, you would just have a normal window. And then the first suggestion is the correct one. So I can hit 1 and it changes the spelling. So that's as easy as that. So next we have abbreviations. So think of it as kind of like an autocorrect. If you want a word to autocorrect, so DEH to the is a very common mistake. This can be autocorrected, and in my case, I have these little arrows that I can produce by typing it. So again, let's see this in action here. So let's imagine that I want to type this arrow, so I can go to insert mode, do twice greater sans and space. It essentially changes or autocorrects to whatever I set it up there. So let's look at various key bindings. For example, I can use Markdown clipboard image call to paste an image from clipboard, which is super useful if you do anything. You want to paste an image, maybe you write a tutorial or you want to create a README file. So let's give it a try. So I can just select our presentation here. I'm selecting like with a screen sharing tool. So I have now a picture inside of my clipboard. And then we can again go here. And if I had PI, so I have to do edit again. All right, so editing. Okay, let's save it. Sometimes I need to edit the file so the LSP loads, and let's try PI again. So you see at the bottom here, it asks me for image name, just type whatever. And now this is an image. So it says like XXX, PNG. And if I want to edit it again, or, whatever, this image is now in the image folder in the XXX PNG, under XXX PNG name, and it will be visible inside. So it's here, this media folder that was created. So we need to change it to media. Let's do this. And you can see that the preview of the image is right inside here. I'm not sure if it will be visible on the video. That should be part of the terminal. So we have taken this image and now we can see it as a preview inside of Neovim. If I move away from this line, and this preview disappears. That's a really neat functionality that you can have inside of Neovim. All right, so let's delete it, save it again. So there are various other shortcuts. In this case, I can tap double square brackets, close, and open, respectively, to move with headers. So if I do that, it takes me to second header, third header, and so on. I can kind of keep moving quickly by headers, so it makes navigation really easy. Some other useful key bindings and key maps. I can, for example, insert markdown style checkbox list, or I can also insert the table of contents, generate it or insert it. So let's see it actually as on an example of a different file. So here I have a file that we will look at later, but when I type TOC, you can see on the right hand side it generated for me a window that essentially is like, table of contents, and I can navigate through it. So that's quite useful. To close it, open again the same file. We need to open the right file here. Okay, so that was the table of content, but I can also insert the table of content. So this is quite useful too. I go, for example, here and I do insert talk or numbered talk, numbered file of contents. So I can see it inserts this kind of table of contents on the top with three headers. So that's quite useful too. And this little ML, it essentially adds kind of this markdown style bullet point. So you can create whatever shortcuts you want, but that's the ones that are quite useful. Image handling, we've seen how it works. I pasted an image and I was able to see it inside of Neovim. In order to do this, you need a plugin called Image Envim from 3RD, and you need to actually install it using Lua Rocks. The instructions are on the plugin webpage. It's really, really interesting. If you essentially don't always need to display the markdown inside of web browser. You can essentially use this plugin to see the images inside of it. In order for the images to be rendered, you need a previewer. So you need either a terminal that supports the image capability, like Kitty, for example, or in my case, I'm using Alacrity, and I needed to use Iberzug to do this preview. But whatever you use, this plugin would integrate with it, and you can configure which preview method you want. Another interesting part is integration with pandok. You can do this using Vim pandok. There are other plugins as well, but you don't really need the plugin. You can essentially use external command, and if you have pandok installed, you can generate a PDF out of your file. So let's see how it's going to look like. So we're going to swap again here. I'm going to search for the commands. It will be something like pandok. We have here this command that I used, and if I hit enter, it's now generated a README PDF so that we can see how it looks like. We can open this window and do open README PDF, and you can see that it's a generated README file, README PDF from our README markdown file. Which again is very easy. You don't need any plugin to do this. Pandok is in and of itself really powerful to give you all this integration. Fenced code blocks. This is something I work with a lot, and when you write markdown, you often want to provide an example, or I also use it for learning. So here is an example of using the Neovim object, text object, which essentially gives me the ability to work with code fences. So anything that is inside of a code fence or outside of a code fence, including the code fence itself, the triple backticks, it is essentially a text object. I will create a separate video about text objects, a really powerful concept in Vim and Neovim, but it gives me ability to work with it, and I'll show you this in a second with the other topics. Another very interesting idea is to be able to execute code blocks. This is something I use for learning. I also use for things like runbooks. If you are in the infrastructure space, you typically want to have a runbook to execute when you have an outage. And executing code blocks is really useful for that purpose. Another one is if you have a code block and you want to essentially see if your code is correct, you can use another plugin that attaches LSP to the existing code block. It's very, very useful too. So before we go to Veil, let me show you how this works. So here we have this code block right here, and you can see that it is simply a shell script that iterates over every line of a file, in this case etc os release, and outputs it to the terminal. So I can execute it using md-eval. In my case, it's shortcut -ev, and you can see at the bottom here we have this result that just popped up, and it tells us what operating system I am using. I'm using Pop! OS 2204 and so on and so forth. So we just executed the code. I'm going to do this one more time, or maybe we can do this one, for example, space EV, and you can see at the bottom it provides the result. Very, very useful for various purposes, but in this case we're using it for learning. Let's imagine that I want to see if this code is correct. So I can do pemaco, I don't have a shortcut for it, and you can see that it attached LSP to it. So it gives me a warning that this is going to read the lines rather than words, which is what we want. So I'm all right with it. But if we, could, for example, make a mistake here, it would tell us also that there are some errors. Not sure why it's not doing it. There you go. So couldn't parse and so on. So we have actually LSP attached, and you can see it with LSP info. We have bash ls LSP attached to our buffer ID 31, which is our little window here. So that's very helpful. If you don't want to like open a whole file, create a file, a set file setting, you can just edit it right here in the code block. As I mentioned earlier, we can also work with the code block. So for example, since code block for me is in a new Vim text object, I can do something like VIM, which is for M stands for my code block. I selected everything inside of my code block. I can do DAM, that would delete the whole code block, and so on and so forth. So text objects work with this triple backticks. So super, super useful. A little bit more advanced topic, if you write a lot of prose and you want to be consistent and compliant with some guidelines for writing it. So for example, you want to avoid certain phrases or avoid a passive voice or something. There's a tool called Veil, which is a CLI that you can integrate with. And you can use this CLI to essentially evaluate your document. This is like, think about it as a linter for your document. So let's see how it works. If I go here and type Veil, which I have it as a command, you can see that at the bottom it kind of gives me all kinds of warnings and suggestions. Something is too wordy, so the word evaluate, it doesn't like it. And then kind of the other various suggestions like fences. It doesn't like the fences and so on. Let's see what else it says. Yeah, so there's just about those fences and evaluate being too wordy. You can configure this. I'm not going to talk that much about Veil. It's a pretty big topic in and of itself, but just to show you that you can integrate this tool with Neovim, and then you can automate some of it, which is really cool. All right. So I'm not sure why this little preview window doesn't close. I have to look at it, but that's for a different problem. Okay, so that was Veil. As a bonus, I want to show you something that is not specifically Markdown specific, but it's really useful for Markdown. There are a plugin called No Neck Pain and the ability to lock the scroll fix to a percentage of the screen height. So let me actually enter this mode. So I have no neck pain. What's happening on the screen that you see, this creates this little scratch buffer that acts as a little buffer zone so that all the text is moved towards the right. So it's kind of like in the middle. I don't need to move my head left and right, and the text remains in the middle here. I can also use this shortcut F2, and now what you see is happening when I scroll. I'm using this J to scroll. The text, the window line stays fixed in a place. So this is 25% of the height of the screen. Again, you know, I don't need to like. So let me maybe show this to you without it. So if I switch this off, you see that when I'm scrolling, it kind of, my cursor goes to the very bottom of the screen and kind of keeps on scrolling, right? Whereas with this, it stays in place. So I don't need to, you know, move my eyes up and down. So those are kind of like quality of life improvements, those two plugins. There are variations of those plugins. I tried a few of them, but for me, this is the simplest and it works quite well. If I work with, if I'm especially writing something, I want to look at this one spot, and I'm just doing this like that. So definitely recommend checking this out. All right, so that was it for today. Our little picture still didn't work for whatever reason. However, thank you for your attention. Thank you for your time. As always, I will leave a link to my setup in the video description, and I will also leave a link to this presentation so you can grab whatever bindings, whatever code you want. Let me know if you're using something else to write Markdown. How do you use it? What do you use it for? As I mentioned, I use it for writing content, for writing README files for various projects. So there's quite a lot of use cases for me. And that's why I've integrated it with pictures and all the other stuff there. All right. Thanks again for watching, and see you in the next video.